In this gripping tale set in the heart of America, a rancher's dark deal turns into something no one expected. Secrets unfold, passions ignite, and a single night changes everything. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Where are you watching from? Let's get started. The sun was sinking low over the endless Texas plains, casting long amber shadows across the Lawson Ranch. The air smelled of dust, leather and hay, and the cries of distant cattle echoed faintly against the horizon. Rhett Lawson rode home in silence, his hat tilted low, his hands steady on the reins. He was a man built of silence and scars, the kind that carried his past like a shadow that never left. The world had taken much from him, but he had learned to keep his heart cold and his promises colder. When Rhett dismounted, the sound of his boots crunching against the dry earth was the only noise. The barn door creaked as he pushed it open, and inside, standing in the half-light, was a woman, young, fragile, but with a fire in her eyes that didn't match her torn dress or trembling hands. Her name was Mara. She had been brought here that morning after Rhett paid off the debts that had trapped her in the city. To everyone else, it looked like he'd bought her. To Mara, that's exactly how it felt. The moment she saw him, her chest tightened. This was the man who now held the key to her freedom, or her prison. She stepped forward, defiant but terrified, her voice cutting through the silence.
"You paid for me.
"Now take it off," she said, the words dripping with anger and humiliation. She expected cruelty, a command, something that would prove what she already believed about men like him. But Rhett didn't move. He just stood there, his blue eyes locked on hers, unreadable, like he was studying a ghost. Seconds stretched into minutes. Rhett's jaw tightened. "That's not what I brought you here for," he finally said, his voice low, firm, but not cruel. Mara blinked, unsure whether to believe him. No man ever did something for nothing, especially not for someone like her, someone broken, with no name worth remembering. She crossed her arms and turned away, feeling the weight of his gaze but refusing to let him see her tears. Days passed slowly on the ranch. The rhythm of life there was simple but relentless. Feed the horses, mend the fences, fix what the desert wind broke. Mara tried to keep to herself, but Rhett always seemed to be nearby, not watching her exactly, but making sure she was all right. He gave her work, paid her wages, and let her eat at the same table as the men. It was more kindness than she expected, and more confusion than she wanted. At night, when the moon hung low and the cicadas sang, Mara would sit by the small window of the cabin Rhett had given her. She could see the light from his house across the field, a single flicker that never went out until dawn. She wondered what kind of man stayed awake that long, what kind of past haunted him enough to keep him from sleep. Sometimes she thought she saw him sitting outside with a bottle in his hand, staring into the dark as though waiting for something that would never come back. One evening, after a long day mending fences, Mara found him by the barn. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his hands dirty from work. "You don't have to do all this yourself," she said quietly. Rhett looked at her for a long moment, then handed her a rope. "Out here, we all do our share," he replied simply. It wasn't kindness, and it was equality. And somehow, that was what touched her most. For the first time in years, someone wasn't looking at her as property or pity. He just saw her as a person. The ranch became a kind of refuge for both of them. Rhett found peace in her quiet company, and Mara found strength in his steady presence. But beneath that calm, something deeper was forming, something neither of them dared to name. Sometimes, when he passed her tools or brushed past her in the narrow barn doorway, their hands would touch. Just a spark, but enough to send a wave of warmth through her that scared her more than anything else. Because if she started to trust him, she knew she could get hurt all over again. One night, a storm swept across the plains. The wind howled through the rafters, rain lashing against the windows. Mara woke to the sound of thunder and the creak of the door. Rhett stood there soaked to the bone, his hat dripping. "The horses are spooked," he said, grabbing a lantern. She followed without hesitation, her bare feet splashing through the mud as lightning split the sky. Together they calmed the frightened animals, their voices barely audible over the roar of the storm. For a brief moment, it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of them, breathless, soaked, alive. When the storm finally passed, they stood in the doorway, rain dripping from their hair. Rhett looked at her, really looked at her, and something inside him shifted. The hardness in his eyes softened, and for the first time she saw not the rancher who bought her freedom, but the man who was still trying to earn his own. Mara's breath caught, her heart thudding in her chest. Neither spoke. The night air was heavy with words unspoken, and though neither of them knew it yet, that moment, beneath the fading thunder and the scent of wet earth, would change everything. Morning came soft and golden after the storm. The air was clean, the earth damp, and the ranch smelled of new beginnings. Rhett was already outside, repairing a broken fence when Mara stepped out of her cabin, her hair still damp from the night's rain. She watched him work in silence, every movement deliberate, every breath heavy with thought. Something between them had shifted in the dark hours of that storm. They hadn't touched, hadn't spoken, but something wordless had passed between them, an understanding neither of them dared to break. For days afterward, the ranch settled back into rhythm, but the silence between them grew louder. Mara tried to focus on her chores, but every time she saw Rhett, her pulse quickened. He'd look away quickly, pretending not to notice her stare, yet every small kindness, a tool left by her hand, a chair pulled out at the table, carried weight. There was something about the way he avoided her that told her he felt it too. It was unspoken, forbidden even, but it was real. One evening, as the sky bled into violet and the sun melted behind the hills, Mara found Rhett by the corral, staring into the horizon. She hesitated, then walked up beside him. "You haven't said much lately," she murmured. He didn't turn. "Sometimes words don't fix what's broken," he said. His voice was soft, but the sadness behind it felt deep as the Texas soil. Mara looked at him, her throat tightening. "Then maybe it's time you stopped trying to fix it alone." He turned then, slowly, his eyes searching hers as though testing how much truth she could bear. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her, that he might finally let himself feel. But instead he stepped back, his jaw tightening. "You don't understand, Mara," he said quietly. "I already have a wife." The words hit her like a bullet. Her breath caught, her heart sinking. "What?" she whispered. Rhett took off his hat, running a rough hand through his hair. "She's gone," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of memory. 3 years now. The river took her. I wasn't there to save her." The confession hung heavy in the cooling air. Mara could see the pain in his face, the guilt carved deep into every line. "I thought bringing you here might fill the silence," Rhett went on, his voice trembling now. "You were trapped, and I thought maybe helping you would fix something in me, but it didn't. It just reminded me what I lost." Mara's eyes welled up, her heart aching not for herself, but for him. "You didn't bring me here to fix you," she said softly. "You brought me here because you still know what's right." "That means you're not broken." He turned away, his shoulders tense. "You don't know what kind of man I am." Mara stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then show me." Rhett froze. The night was still except for the low hum of crickets and the creak of the wooden fence. Slowly he looked at her, and for the first time he didn't hide. His eyes were wet, his guard gone. In that fragile moment, he looked less like a rancher and more like a man standing at the edge of redemption, afraid to take the next step. Mara reached out and touched his hand, rough, scarred, trembling. "You don't have to carry her ghost forever," she said. Rhett swallowed hard, closing his eyes as if her touch burned and healed at once. "She was my whole world," he said. "I promised I'd never love anyone else." Mara smiled sadly. "Then don't. Just start living again. That's enough." The words sank into him like rain into dry earth. He didn't respond, but his hand didn't pull away either. The stars began to emerge above them, quiet witnesses to a truth too fragile to name. Over the following weeks, something changed. Rhett spoke more. He started to laugh again, quietly, awkwardly at first. Mara noticed how he began fixing the old porch swing, how he brought flowers in from the field without saying a word, how he left a cup of coffee for her each morning before sunrise. They still didn't speak of what had happened that night, but the silence was no longer empty. It was comfortable, healing. The ranch, once a place of ghosts, had begun to feel alive again. One evening, the town doctor came by, bringing news that Rhett's ranch was to be inspected for sale. The land taxes had piled up, and without help, he could lose everything. Rhett brushed it off, but Mara could see the worry behind his calm. That night, when he sat by the fire, she placed an envelope on the table, money she'd been saving since she arrived. "Take it," she said firmly. Rhett stared at her. "I'm not taking your money." "Then think of it as me paying for my freedom," she said. "Only this time I choose where it goes." Rhett looked at her for a long time, then smiled faintly. "You're a stubborn woman." Mara met his gaze. "You're a stubborn man." For the first time, laughter broke between them. Genuine, light, unguarded. And in that laughter, something shifted again. The ghosts of the past loosened their grip, replaced by the fragile hope of something new. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and wildflowers, a promise of renewal on the Texas air. Months later, the ranch thrived again. The fields were greener, the fences strong, the silence warm instead of hollow. Mara often found Rhett sitting on that repaired porch swing, a quiet smile on his face as he watched the horizon. When she joined him, he would hand her a cup of coffee and say nothing, and she needed nothing more. Love didn't come with grand gestures or spoken vows. Sometimes it came softly, like dawn over the plains, unexpected, quiet, and strong enough to outlast the storms. And in the heart of that wide Texas land, two broken souls found peace not in forgetting, but in forgiving themselves, each other, and the past that had nearly drowned them both.